So, well, just kind of an overview of the week. I'm happy with the progress we made this last week helping middle-class Minnesotans. We passed the tax conformity bill on a bipartisan vote, strong bipartisan vote, which was great. It's going to help about 200,000 plus Minnesotans be able to make their tax filings easier and provide tax relief to teachers and families who have kids in college and others. I think it's the right step for Minnesota. We also passed the Medicaid expansion that's going to cover about 35,000 more Minnesotans and save the state some money at the same time, which is a nice deal for us. Next week, the thing that I'm most excited about is we're going to, Representative Marquardt is going to have the first of, I think, a series of committee meetings in his education committee with the goal of defining, what do we need to build the best workforce, to have the best workforce in Minnesota globally in a decade, and what do we need to do to get there. And it's going to include not just Paul's committee, but also the Higher Ed Committee, Early Childhood, Carlos Mariani's policy committee members, but really engaging with experts over the next couple weeks to understand what it takes to get to that point and what the barriers are. And we know what some of them are: the achievement gap, the fact that too many of our students aren't getting to the place that they need to get. And then, more importantly, it will kind of, I hope, reframe our discussion so it's not just about whether we add more money or not, but what are the specific things we can invest in most effectively to get to that goal, and over the next decade put benchmarks in place to make sure that as we spend money toward that goal, that we're actually achieving those outcomes. I think it's I'm really excited about the prospects this has to really change our education discussion in Minnesota as we move forward. And so anybody will be watching for that on Tuesday. And why don't you go, Erin, just to kind of highlight the rest of the House, and then you go, Tom. Does that work? Okay.
Good morning. We had a pretty productive week on the floor this week. In addition to passing our House rules and the federal conformity and the MA expansion, we also did the farmer lender mediation bill, which is an extension of a current law. It's good for Minnesota farmers. It's great for the ag community in greater Minnesota, and we were really happy that we were able to move that forward with bipartisan support. Last night we also ratified the state contracts, and we did that in a clean way with a bipartisan vote. I think there were about 14 Republicans that joined us in voting for that, and that's good news for our state employees who are working hard and haven't seen a pay increase in 3 years, and that's one more step in broadening the middle class and prosperity for everyone. This week we had 2 special elections, and we're happy to welcome Clark Johnson from St. Peter and Tamatese from St. Cloud to the Minnesota House, and they'll both be sworn in next Tuesday, I think at different times, but on Tuesday early in the day. So we'll have the House of Representatives back up at full strength with 134 voting members. Next week on the floor we should see action on 4 very non-controversial bills on the General Register. It's a Melissa Hortman bill, a Ryan Winkler bill, a Deb Hillstrom bill, and a first bill by a first-termer, Joanne Ward. They were passed out of committee, I think, without amendments, bipartisan support, and voice votes, so we shouldn't anticipate a lot of fireworks on those bills as we move forward. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tom Bakk.
Well, I feel like I've spent the week kind of in 2 areas. It was Duluth and St. Louis County days this week, so I spent a lot of time with people from the Arrowhead region of the state, and that actually was kind of enjoyable when you're a rural member and you get the chance to visit in St. Paul with some people from at home. That's kind of enjoyable. The second thing I think, as I think back on the week, is I've spent a lot of time managing expectations. It seems like most people that come to see me say they need more money than the governor has in his budget. So I've started to think about that some, that even the spending levels in the governor's budget, I think we need to remind people, the spending levels in the governor's budget are only made possible by the passage of his tax reform bill. And as people start to pick away pieces of his tax bill, the governor's spending starts to unravel. And I actually said at Duluth Days earlier this week at the breakfast that you can't have one without the other. And I think, as I've kind of observed, I think there's a general agreement, and I certainly agree with the governor's priorities. But then you have to be willing to pay for them. So I think as we go forward the next few weeks, I think that's where some of this conversation is going to lead. It seems like there's a lot of support for the areas that he's spending money in, and a lot of support to even spend more money in some of those areas. So pretty soon we're going to have to start to have a conversation with those same people about the revenue that's going to be required to sustain the spending. So, and then I've started to think a little bit just about that, about what, in my mind, what would be a successful conclusion to the session. I guess you start to think about that as I've been thinking about budget targets that Paul and I will be getting together to talk about relatively soon, I guess, is what would a successful conclusion be. And at this point in the session, I'm thinking about thinking there's kind of two things today at least that I'd like to be able, when we go home, say we accomplished. And the first is to solve the state's structural budget problems so that the next legislature elected isn't put in the position that we are today. We're immediately having to deal with a deficit. The second thing I hope to get out of this session is to restore, and it's going to take more than one biennium, but at least at the beginning, start to restore the relationship between the state and our local units of government. And by that I mean our cities, our towns, our counties, our school districts. I think the relationship over the last few bienniums has been deteriorating further and further as it feels like around the Capitol here we've just kind of cast them off to be on their own. And we depend on those local government units to provide the services that most Minnesotans expect. So when we go home, I hope that's the other thing that we're able to have accomplished, is started at least to rebuild that relationship with the people who really deliver most of the services that Minnesotans see.
So just to kind of give you a recap of our week, this week we had a couple of stops for the healthcare exchange. It went through environment, economic development, and ag finance, in the HHS finance division, and next week it's at its final stop, which will be the full finance division. Also next week in the committees, we'll start talking about firearms, which I know should drive a lot of traffic to the Capitol one way or the other, so we'll start to have that conversation. On the floor this week, we passed the early expansion of medical assistance, which we think is fantastic, that it now goes up to 138% of poverty, so we'll have more folks being eligible to get comprehensive health care, which we think is really important. We, along with the House, did the tax conformity bill and several confirmations. Next week, we don't have anything on the floor that we think is major, just kind of procedural and paperwork bills. So I think that that's kind of what our path is for next week and kind of what we've been able to get done this past week.
What's the plan for the Judiciary Committee on the gun legislation? What days? How long? What's the plan?
I believe Senator Latz announced there were going to be 2 days of hearings. I actually had my office put a call into him this morning and asked to meet with him after session on Monday so I can personally get an idea of, I don't know if it's Wednesday, Thursday, or Thursday, Friday actually even, but...
I'm hearing Thursday, Friday.
Thursday, Friday? I've heard both, so I'm not sure which it is. And I know there's some people starting to get concerned about security issues here, just because I believe there's likely going to be more people for the Senate hearings than there probably were for the House ones, probably on both sides, as some of the momentum and emotions kind of probably will get to even a higher level this week. So I think we all need to be conscious of that. But I'll be talking with Senator Latz Monday about how he plans to proceed.
There was a rally this week to promote same-sex marriage. You all have voiced some support for that. But when? When would that actually come to the fore?
Well, I think we've been pretty clear that we're going to get our budget work done first, and that's about as much as I can say right now, if it comes to the floor.
So you're not guaranteeing that it will pass this session?
No, I don't know.
You're not guaranteeing that it will come up this session?
It will come up. It'll be introduced. I imagine that there'll be some committee discussion around it, but I don't know the answer to that.
If the Democrats are supportive of it, then why not bring it up?
We have to get our budget work done first, and we don't know how the conversation is going to evolve. You know, the rally yesterday was big and strong. Had a lot of clearly there's substantial support for moving forward with that notion, with moving toward gay, authorizing same-sex marriage in Minnesota. But that, as they noted yesterday, is just the start of their conversation with Minnesotans. We need to see how that evolves.
Do you think it has the votes now in the House?
So I don't know.
What do you mean?
We haven't done a vote count.
Does it
What-
have the votes in the Senate?
We have not had one conversation about that issue. And I think there will be probably likely bills introduced next week, but I guess my position is the same as Paul's. In fact, relative to when it may come up, certainly bills are going to get introduced. Certainly they're going to have committee hearings. I mean, we have committee deadlines that are real, that committees are going to have to meet if any bill is ever going to end up on the floor for future consideration. And I would remind you, a month from today is the first committee deadline, March 15th. So time will start to become of the essence here before very long if any policy bills are going to be considered. So I expect you're going to see hearings. And but my thought is we would try and get the budget off of the floor in the Senate and into conference committee before we take up any significant policy initiatives. I don't expect, and just for instance, I wouldn't expect we'd take up gun issues on the floor till after the budget's in conference. I wouldn't guess we'd take up gay marriage. I wouldn't guess we'd take up the minimum wage, all major significant policy initiatives until we've got the budget well on its way into conference committee.
The bill authors of the gay marriage bill sound a lot more confident about its passage than the two of you. Are they wrong?
If I was a bill author, I'd want to sound really confident too.
But they say they're confident in their support from leadership, specifically.
I think Tom and I have both said, and Erin and Jeff have all said we support the bill. So there's no question about that.
But you won't say it will pass.
I'm not going to guarantee that bill is going to pass this year because I don't know.
Well, at the risk of some people being upset with me, I'm just on behalf of the Senate want to tell you, and we've got some longtime staffers that work for the Senate, and people in the Senate can only remember one time in anybody's recollection where we took a caucus position and told people as we went out onto the floor that this is something you have to do or you don't do. And it was on a workers' comp issue years ago. And I don't expect that the caucus under my leadership is going to be taking caucus positions on issues either. We're going to try and work through in a consensus way in the caucus to build support for issues that are important to authors. But I do not plan to ask the caucus members to all support any measure.
But you can decide if it gets to the floor.
That's absolutely true.
And will the bill get to the floor?
Bills that will have 34 votes are going to get to the floor of the Senate, and those that don't probably won't.
Speaker, do you agree with the majority leader? Once the budget passes the House, then you can take up policy? Or when you say the budget has to get done, do you mean signed into law?
No, I think we can start taking up, my sense of it is we can start taking up some policy once those budget bills are getting into conference committee and good progress is being made. You know, so the way conference committees make progress is when you have agreed upon targets to get there. So I think at that point then we'll have a good sense of where we're headed.
When do you expect your budget, and this is for any of you, to be in conference committee?
I don't know right now. I mean, I would imagine early May, right? I mean, that's, you know, so like not unusual.
What's your caucus on the nurse staffing ratio issue that came up this week?
Representative Atkins is authoring a bill that is a different version of a solution to the problem of staffing in the hospitals. And so he's the right person to talk to about it. The bill has just been introduced. I don't think it's been calendared for a hearing yet. And I think that what's important is that the participants, the nurses and the hospitals, work together to try and find a solution. This is an issue that's been coming before the legislature for a number of years. And there's been a fair amount of impasse, and I think it's time now for those parties to come together, and I think Representative Atkins is a great choice of an author to try and bring folks together, and I'm sure Senator Hayden is going to have something to say about this as well.
Do you have any conflict with the nursing bill, given your work with the union?
Well, I terminated my work with the Minnesota Nurses Association in 2007, so I don't have any affiliation with them anymore. So, no, I don't perceive that I have a conflict. I don't work in a hospital. I teach at St. Kate's.
Well, since I'm the chief author of the staffing, or the Standards of Care Act, I think is what we call it now, in the Senate, I absolutely agree with Representative Murphy that it is kind of time to have this conversation, and so we're hoping to have a really good conversation about this issue. What we found is that as in these matters that, we're talking to nurses who are saying that they think that there are some issues in a really kind of dynamic way on the nursing floor, and hospitals seem to think that they have it kind of figured out. But there's enough kind of issues between the two that we thought it was pretty important to at least have that conversation. So Representative Atkins and I have both kind of taken an approach to having a very open door policy. We hope that they can kind of work together and find a solution without us kind of getting in the middle of it, but we thought that it was time for us to at least kind of help usher that along. So we have been open to all of the hospitals and all the parties involved, including some of the support staff that are a little concerned about how this is going to play out. So I know that I have talked to some of my staff folks, probably have had well over 40, 50 conversations since the beginning of session in anticipation of the bill being introduced this week. So we're having a very open conversation, careful not to demonize anybody, but really to make sure that we have safe patient care, that workers are protected, and that hospitals are able to kind of continue to run their business in a way that really kind of helps Minnesotans.
Now that you've had a chance, all of you, to see and think about the governor's tax plan a little bit more, and Senator Bakk, you brought this up. How's that playing in your chambers, and what are you folks thinking about it? As you say, it's a package deal. Is it the package that can stay together? Is it going to see big changes? Update us on where you are there.
I don't mean to defer to Senator Skoye, but I have to tell you, he has spent hours with the Commissioner of Revenue, and I know for a fact he spent 3 hours one night this week with him. So I really, unfortunately, really have to defer to him on that because I haven't been part of the conversation.
But you do hear from your members, I assume. You talk to your members. Where's it going? Does this have a lot of support, or are there holes in it? Where are members telling you there might be holes?
I actually have not heard from members about the governor's tax plan.
But you've heard
Some of the tax committee members, of course, are having conversations. You'd expect them to do that, but outside of the tax committee members, I really haven't heard from other members about that issue.
But you've heard a lot from people outside this building, particularly on the B2B. Where are you on the B2B?
I've requested from the Department of Revenue a list of what all the B2B services are. I expect it's pretty exhaustive. And I think once we get that, we can take a look at, are there some that are just totally problematic? Are there others that are not? And I just think about the fact that, we tax business-to-business services now. It's not fair to say that we don't. And the first one that comes to mind with me, although you wouldn't think it outside, is when a business contracts with a lawn service firm that comes and provides their lawn maintenance on their campus, they pay sales tax on that. So when a business has dry cleaning done, they pay sales tax on that. So it's not, and they're dealing business to business. So there are things that businesses currently pay sales tax on a business to business transaction. So when I see the list, I think we'll start talking to business people about kind of where the really problematic areas are, and I suspect there'll be some modification to the governor's proposal in that area.
So 2 questions on that. One, are you saying that there's some new business to business that would be acceptable? And secondarily, aren't all businesses going to say, tax me and it's problematic? So how can you listen to some saying this is a problem when the others are probably also going to say it's a problem?
Well, everybody would like to pay less. But it's interesting, those same people that are talking about the problems with the business-to-business taxation are also talking about, frankly, have told me, we think the governor has his priorities in the right place relative to investment in our workforce. So the question just becomes, is there, where's the middle ground, and continuing to invest in those priorities that we all agree on and finding the revenue.
Senator Bakk, you talked
Speaker, can you get it on
about, go ahead, Don.
I just want to follow up on the same questions, if you could get it on.
Well, I mean, I think that I think Senator Bakk hit it and hit the nail on the head in both regards. He's a carpenter. There you go. In that, first of all, he's absolutely right that businesses and other Minnesotans have been asking for the kind of investments that Governor Dayton is talking about in his budget, especially the investments in education and workforce development. Those, there's no question about that. And so it is incumbent on the businesses to, not to try to have their cake and eat it too, right? And secondly, I think that there's a meritorious discussion to have around what kind of business-to-business taxes work and what kind of business-to-business taxes may be more problematic. And it really does, of course, every business is going to say, don't tax this particular type of business, but the business-to-business taxes are not really about what business you're in some sense, but how it affects the businesses that buy those services. And in that sense, the taxes do have a significantly different effect, and we need to dig into those differences. But I haven't had a huge outcry from our caucus on the business-to-business aspect of this package as part of an entire package as we look forward, and I think that that's going to be something that's going to be considered in the House budget as we move forward.
So just taking a page from Don Davis's book, this is a yes or no question. Do you think some new business-to-business services will be taxed by the end of the session?
I think there's a good chance, yes.
I agree.
So you had a question?
Yes, Senator Bakk, you talked before about the importance of realizing the balance between new revenue, new spending, and not letting that fall apart based upon pulling out taxes. If eventually you have to pull out some B2B taxes, where does that replacement come from?
I think we'll find it in the tax bill.
Any ideas?
And I mean, it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody. I actually authored a bill in March of 2010. Now, just speaking for myself, I don't have a clue how the rest of the caucus feels, but, I mean, I've previously been the chief author of a bill to tax clothing. Not at a $100 threshold, but, I mean, I've authored that. That's no secret to people who work around the Capitol. Could be one of the things that gets considered if some of the pieces start to become problematic. But I have a clue where the members of the tax committee are on that subject.
Senator Murphy, do you expect, or have you been told directly that as a result of the passing the pre-filing rule change, there won't be any Republican support for bonding bill?
I heard that on the floor, but I have not been told that directly, and would hope that our interest in representing Minnesota and Minnesotans would trump the heat of the moment in a rules debate.
Let me just, several members of the Republican Party on that issue. First of all, no one is being limited in their debate, and that's a false accusation about that, because everybody can offer any amendment they want. In the private sector, people would be astounded we'd even be having this discussion right now. The second thing is for Representative Davids and others to get up and say, we are going to be obstructionists all session because you passed these rules. Minnesotans didn't vote for that, and if he wants to take that to the people of Minnesota, more power to him.
So remind us, why are these new rules a good thing?
So the people of Minnesota can actually weigh in, and so representatives can actually understand what they're voting on. When you get and this is true of me, when you get an amendment on the floor that comes in that you've never seen before, that's 5, 6, 7, 20 pages long, no representative can possibly imagine that they're going to be able to understand what that means. And that's a terrible process. It leads to really bad legislation being passed at times. What we're doing with this rule, it's a very reasonable and manageable rule. What we're saying is representatives and people across the state should be able to weigh in a public way on bills and on legislation that's being passed, and that's what this rule allows us to do.
It took the House how many hours to pass the rule? Many, many, many. Is that bad management that you all didn't come to some agreement with the minority so that it wouldn't be an 8-10 hour debate?
No.
Why not?
Because
Your first long debate was something completely inside baseball, internal. It wasn't about jobs or the people of Minnesota, the middle class, or education. It was about yourselves.
That wasn't our choice.
Senator Bakk, a couple weeks ago you floated this idea of the sales tax possibly just being for in-state and people coming from out of state. It would not apply to. What kind of reaction have you got to that, and do you still think that's a good idea?
Well, I mentioned it in the context of trying to find a way to address some of the concerns with the Mall of America. Because clearly they use as a marketing strategy to their international customer base the fact that they don't have to pay sales tax on clothing in Minnesota. I think the message would be just as strong to those international customers if you said that your sales tax on clothing is 100% refundable in Minnesota. Now, could we figure out a mechanism to accomplish that? And it's not unique. There are a lot of countries around the world that allow foreign visitors to be able to do that. I can remember not too many years ago, Canada had that with their GST. There was slips at the border in International Falls, and when you came across, you'd fill out the slip and put it in the mail, and I've received checks back for purchases I made in Ontario for goods I was bringing back here. So I believe the new government, actually when they lowered the national sales tax, they got rid of that provision, but it's pretty common around the world. So I've got the Department of Revenue doing a little work on that. Is there a way to even accomplish that? I don't know, but I'm concerned about it more as it relates to the mall's marketing than anything else.
Senator Bakk, you mentioned sort of getting on track with the structural budget and repairing relationships with state or with local units of government. Before the governor's budget proposal came out, you talked about maybe that would need to wait till the first part would have to wait till 2017 as well. Do you think seeing the governor's budget, do you think we can get on track earlier for structural budget reform, or do you think it's still going to have to wait?
Well, I guess we're going to probably find out more on February 28th. I can tell you I'm a little concerned about the forecast on February 28th. I'll just tell you right now, because I don't know if I'll be here on another Friday before that or not. But I think the reason you saw over $100 million in one-time collections in the most recent month that was reported to MMB was large. You'll notice it was virtually all income tax. I believe that was driven by the federal tax policy changes, and I believe there are a lot of people that decided to cash in some investments and take the dividends at the lower tax rate than the new tax rate that you see now. So what that could have caused is some additional new money in this biennium that now on February 28th will go to pay back the school shift. But you can only collect that money once. So if that money in the November forecast had actually been scored that those dividends would have been taken after July 1st, and they get clawed forward now, I think you could potentially see some of the revenue in the next biennium in the forecast go away. So I'm more concerned now about the deficit growing than I was a few weeks ago.